I forgot to switch it on. Okay, sorry. I'm amazed there's still people here. Gosh, that's after half an hour. Yeah, I noticed there was a few messages that came in. They're probably all saying, no, not that. Let's see if there's another one. Let's see here. Okay, good. All right, well, thank you for your patience. It's fantastic. Gosh, this happens sometimes. Yeah, I've done this before, simply just starting, because I do a check with the mic, I do a check with the camera, but then I forget to switch on the actual webinar, so apologies about that. Anyway, some of you would be familiar with this. I'm basically just going over the Four Noble Truths. And so I'm up to, in terms of the Fourth Noble Truth, the path, then explaining or going over the nature of wisdom. So we have, in terms of the Four Noble Truths, then the fourth is then the path where we would say the remedy for what drives suffering is the practice of the path. And then the path is then based on lifestyle, meditation, and then cultivating this thing we call wisdom. And so wisdom on one hand is hearing what you could say wise, what people we would consider wise, what they have to say, people that we genuinely trust. And of course, what's basic about what we call the Buddhist teaching is that there's two aspects of the way the Dharma reaches us. One is from, you could say, the heritage of the theory. Like there's a lot of writings in the Buddhist teaching. You could say what's extraordinary about the Buddhist science is that they agree with the Buddha. Down from the time of the Buddha down until the present day, everyone agrees with what the Buddha has taught. There's different ways of presenting it. There's not really like a conflict. You know, discovering enlightenment is freedom from confusion. Everyone agrees that what the Buddha presented is valid, and also the basics of the Buddha's teaching absolutely valid. So there's, you could say, universal agreement. But what is special about the teaching from the Buddha then until today is not just that there's the theory and the books and all of that, you could say the academic heritage, but there's also living traditions. And that's why the teaching comes down to us through actual persons that have awakening. So that's, for example, nowadays we'd look to someone like the Dalai Lama or Khenpo Rinpoche. And in my case, I've studied with various teachers who I considered had actually put an complete end to confusion. And that's where the teaching doesn't just exist as a sort of rigid set of this is how we do it, but is very much adapted to the living situation of various cultures, various times, and so forth. So, for example, nowadays, the Buddhist teaching is very often presented in the language of psychology or science, or however it might be, that corresponds to how we in the modern world understand reality. It would make absolutely no sense to begin to sort of expound the Buddhist teaching as it was expounded 2,500 years ago to a modern person. Simply just, the languages just miss each other. Of course, you could say the modern person, probably with some intuition, and also on the basis of, you could say, practicing meditation and so on, would have an understanding of what is being talked about. But the style and the culture around the path are very different. And so that's, for example, where you see people like the Dalai Lama, people like Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso and so on, for us in our particular cultural context. And so that's where, again, our journey is so much about understanding what's the logic of the path, seeing the validity of it. And essentially when it comes to wisdom, which, like I was saying before, is very much premised on our lifestyle and also on the practice of meditation, that's where we cultivate that, hearing the Buddha out, understanding what's being said in terms of our own experience. And that's where we understand, where does our confusion come from? And understanding where confusion originates, then we put an end to confusion through the practice of meditation. And that's where we go beyond philosophy. It's not just that we have an intellectual understanding of how confusion happens, but also we do this on the basis of actual experience. And that's where we understand where is it insanity, or you could say unawareness begins, and where is it that we can put an end to unawareness. And this is not about morals, it's not about beliefs, it's not about thinking, it's not about speculating, it's about experience, being properly, fully aware. And that's where we in the modern world, we usually think aware, but aware of what? And that's where in the teaching, it's more about just when the mind is calm, there's a clarity that emerges that is not entangled in the ordinary narratives and the ordinary conceptual constructs around me, around other, but rather an openness, a lack of judgment, an awareness and understanding that sees without the normal entanglement of judgment, you know, and the various, what we call kileshas, the various styles of neurosis or confusion that we sum up in terms of what we call attachment and aversion, where we very much, you could say, talk on the basis of ego. We sort of like some things and we dislike other things, and essentially continually circling around ego and what the ego likes and doesn't like, judges and likes and dislikes, all of that. That's where, when we understand how that takes place and we understand how meditation remedies this, then it's on the basis of meditation that we discontinue the ordinary entanglement, confusion, and actually engage a greater awareness. And that's where then the path really leads us from this condition of this narrow self-centering and the toxic states of mind into a greater openness, a greater lack of toxicity, a greater lack of confusion. And so all along, it's not as if we're, you could say, cultivating or bringing something in, but it's very much uncovering what was always there, but essentially hidden under layers of insecurity, confusion, and so forth. And that's where we understand our insecurity and confusion. So we can't blame it on somebody. We can't really say, well, it was due to this happening and because of that person or this circumstance and so on. That's why in the Buddhist teaching we say, well, you know, whatever we're encountering, it comes about due to our particular disposition, particular actions that create circumstances, and that's where we end up. But at the same time, as much as we can accept where we are, we're also aware that we could actually work constructively from here onwards, and that's where we then, where we understand that we have all the causes and conditions in our hands to work in terms of what comes next. So that's where sometimes the sort of the idea of karma, it's sort of, people seem to think that it implies that we just accept everything, and that's not at all the case. Obviously, that we here is due to what came before, but what comes next is very much up to us in terms of what are the conditions that we establish, and that's where then we talk about the path in terms of creating the right conditions in which we can eliminate suffering. So that's where you say the basic teaching of all that we have universally in Buddhism is really what we call the Four Noble Truths. There's the acknowledgement of suffering, you say, basic condition of discomfort, the basic condition of delusion. And we talk about suffering really in terms of course, there's the suffering of suffering, the obvious kind of external suffering. But we also talk about how even if we do create circumstances that bring about some happiness, these don't last. That's the thing. They come together for a certain time, but they're so volatile and fragile. So there's what we call the suffering of change. So of course, we have greater suffering, but we also have the fact that what we'd like to hold on to, we can't hold on to. What we don't want to happen inevitably happens. And that's where we're always in a very, you could say, fragile situation, as long as we operate from this view of self. And that's where then we would say the most subtle form of suffering is really this delusion that thinks self and other, and always is, you could say, engaged in liking something, disliking other. And that's where you could say what's different between an ordinary person and a sage is that the sage is open to whatever is there. An ordinary person is always sort of shielding him or herself from certain things, or wishing something and avoiding other things. So that's where there's never really an ease within reality. Whereas the sage is someone who's free from the ordinary, you could say, narratives and conditioning that creates this situation that's painful. So that's where the understanding then of our suffering is very much something that's conditioned on the basis of a cause, which is confusion. This confusion is something that can be remedied, and the way that we remedy is to be proactive in terms of remedying confusion, which is then the path. But all along, this is not about the Buddha saying, this is my way and I've invented this and this is how I've heard it should be, but really just like a physician or a doctor seeing there's individuals that are suffering. Why are they suffering? Seeing why they're suffering, and then making a suggestion how one could eliminate this suffering. And that's really just it. That's where you could say the Buddha's wisdom lies, really in connecting with what is actually there. And as much as we might think, oh, this is sort of a particular culture, it's not really, it's universal. As long as there's consciousness, and consciousness can slip into two conditions. It can be clear, consciousness can be unconfused, or it can slip into this condition of confusion. And that's why in the Buddhist teaching, we talk about two, what we could call phenomenologies, or two, you could say, realms of experience. One is we call samsara, and one is what we call nirvana. And samsara is when we slip into the cycle of ever perpetuating confusion. And nirvana is simply the freedom from that. And that's why we honor the Buddha as the enlightened one, somebody who is free from confusion. So that's a little bit about the Four Noble Truths. I apologize in case I haven't done justice to the subject matter. There's nothing wrong with the Four Noble Truths. There might be some limitations in terms of my ability to explain it. So, any questions about this? If not, I'll just ramble on. Okay. So then in terms of the path, like I started off saying, lifestyle is really helpful. That's where, in terms of the practice of the path, you could say there is very much emphasis on the value of what we're doing with ourselves. So in cultures in which the Dharma flourished, you would very often see people adopting a particular lifestyle. The second, and that's more what I think most of us in the modern world, we are attracted to Buddhism, is the notion that we could actually do something about the confusion of our mind. And that's where we talk about then, like I was saying before, we talk about two ways in which the mind sort of can operate. One is on the level of confusion, which we call samsara, and the other is, that's on the basis that this confusion is not basic to us. We're not born with a selfish gene. We're not basically evil. We're not basically confused, but we certainly get ourselves into states of confusion, and we suffer as a consequence. They also will contribute to suffering around us and so forth. So there's plenty of, we can sort of easily point fingers at individuals and circumstances in which we could say this is dreadful and so on, and that's for sure. But the basic understanding is that all life, all sentient beings, as much as they possess this purity, they fail to recognize it, and as a result, they act in ways that, despite actually wanting happiness, really just creates their own suffering. This is something you so often hear His Holiness the Dalai Lama talk about, and it's basic to all the teachings is really to have sympathy for all beings, because all beings, there's not a single being that doesn't want to be happy. But unfortunately, beings think that they're going to be happy on the basis of gratifying self. And they very often operate with a sense of greed or desire for self, and also on being alienated with regards to the other, and acting aggressively or manipulating the others and so forth. And that's where we look around the world and we see plenty of aggression, we see plenty of greed and so forth, but we can actually bring the cause of all these, you could say, neurotic actions back to a basic a basic confused disposition that really focuses on selfishness. While I want to make it clear that in the Buddhist teaching, then the self is understood as a basic state of confusion. And we could say the more we're confused, then very often then the self-centering becomes enhanced. Then also, we can also see in the world around us when there's selflessness, and not sort of a contrived, passive-aggressive selflessness, but a genuine selflessness. There's a lot more happiness when there's generosity, when there's freedom and so forth. There's a basic goodness and a basic disposition that flourishes. And from that, a lot of happiness comes about. So we can see that it's not really that mystical. It's not something that's unknown to us, but it's more just that we get caught up in this. And so that's where, if we look at the world around us and see suffering, it really comes from these, you could say, confused subjectivities that pursue this agenda of self, or self versus other. So it's really the more we sort of spiral inward and downward with regards to the self-centering, we have the condition that we call samsara. And yet the premise of the Buddha's teaching is that this can be remedied. We could actually get to the bottom of this. And of course, lifestyle in terms of, you could say, how we behave and so forth is helpful. But particularly then, with regards to the practice of meditation, it's really a place where we could calm the mind and it could find its way back to a place that's not, you could say, so anxious, not so insecure, not so caught up in the paranoid relationship between self and other. And that's where meditation, interestingly, despite what it looks like, and I'll come back to that in context of talking about meditation, but it's as if we create sort of a bubble of barriers between self and other. And of course, within modern psychology, we talk about the necessity of setting boundaries and all of that. And that's fair enough. That's you could say, acts of sanity. But there's an insane dimension. There's an insane dimension where there's this sort of exaggerated sense of I. And that's where we very often, in our nervousness, create barriers, unnecessary, and closing down open communication, closing down, you could say, our perceptions, judging without properly relating to the experiences we have. And that's where we create barriers. And the purpose of meditation is very much for us to connect with just being present without these barriers. And that's really what's implicit in the practice of what we call shamatha and vipassana, where shamatha is where we are calm. But then, with, you know, just like when we know people, they're having they're throwing a tanty, or they're sort of all wound up, we just say, chill out, calm down, take it easy, take a deep breath. And then actually people regain their sanity. They become, you know, they get over themselves, they get over their tanty and so on. And this is sort of, in a way, you could say, a very straightforward way of explaining the process of shamatha and vipassana, which really is that we sit just from the point of view of connecting. And of course, in the Buddhist meditation, yes, we connect with the breath, we connect with in various ways to actually ground ourselves. But it's within that we then also begin to, you could say, be more at ease with our perceptions, be more at ease with our thoughts. And that's where the quality of vipassana is, where we begin to be less entangled in the rigidity of our narratives, our ruminations, our attitudes, and all of that. We soften up, we become more open. And that's implicit in what we call vipassana. And that's why vipassana is not about going into a particular state. It's not like sometimes we think of meditation as there's an evil world out there, and I'm going into myself because I want to recharge my batteries. But the thing is, while we're in there recharging our batteries, we're still upholding that sort of attitude that the world out there is evil. So it doesn't really help. We might sort of come back with charged batteries, but if these batteries are all sort of about driven by the notion of there's a bad world out there, there's bad people, etc., then we're not really getting to the bottom of what actually is you could say, the real issue here, which is our insecurity and our fear of the other, our alienation, and so forth. So the practice of meditation, oddly, despite what it looks like, is actually us allowing ourselves to connect with the world, connect with reality, and take down the barriers that we normally set up artificially, unnecessarily. And that's where you could say a sage is not somebody who has escaped to the Himalayas and never wants to come down because it's a bad world there. But the sage might spend some time meditation or whatever, and the sage, however, he or she has gotten there, or they have gotten there, it's really on the basis that what really defines a sage is someone that has dissolved in one way or another, however, has dissolved this anxiety with regards to one's own world, one's projections, that one is no longer, you could say, uncomfortable with oneself, is no longer uncomfortable with the world. There's an acceptance and a joy in relating to oneself, relating to the phenomenal world. There's a joy in relating to others. And this comes from dismantling barriers rather than setting them up. So despite sometimes you have in the context of the spiritual path the notion of retreating away from the world, that would really only be temporarily to really just regain sanity and essentially begin to take down barriers. And we then integrate that in interaction. That's why also we would say when we meditate really as a training, but the training is applied also in post-meditation when we're not meditating. And that's where we integrate this in ordinary life. And that's why so much of the emphasis in Buddhist teaching, like for example from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is really about compassion. But then again, to be compassionate, it's not going to help if we're just sort of determined to be compassionate to people that we think are actually profoundly bad or we feel insecure and so forth. But really coming from a place of discovery that there's goodness and then actually engaging with the world around us in a more open way. So in that way, sort of you could say the path of meditation really consists of the practice of meditation, but also combining that with the integration and post-meditation. Okay. I hope this is making sense. I'm so impressed that people were hanging in there for that half hour where there was no sound. That's so good. So, yeah, the tanka that's on my, fortunately you guys can't see that, but I have a tanka here that's tanka of Bodhisattva Chenrezig. The tanka of Chenrezig, this represents what we call forearm Chenrezig. In Tibet, we would sometimes say this was the principal deity in Tibet. First of all, in Buddhism, when we talk about deity, we're really just talking about aspects of Buddha nature. But we could say sometimes these qualities that we possess within, we see them in others. And we would say the Bodhisattva Chenrezig embodies qualities that we possess, but we very much invoke the image and the memory of Chenrezig or Avalokiteshvara from the point of view of just thinking of someone like that, then these qualities, they sort of begin to become part of ourselves. So in Tibet, when we talk about deities and in Vajrayana, Tantra, what have you, the notion of deity is always associated with qualities that are innate to this purity that we naturally possess. And so in Tibet, there was a lot of practice of invoking the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And this also is where we have the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, that many people who sort of come across Tibetan culture, they would come across this mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Also, if ever you came across Ram Dass's book, Be Here Now, he's also really big on the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. So it's something that's sort of universally, it's almost sort of part of, you could say, the modern spiritual world, really. And it is, you know, from the point of view of certainly the Buddhists, they have no proprietary notion that is, hey, this is Buddhist territory, hands off that mantra. It's very much that it's universally something wonderful. And just yesterday, a few of us were discussing the value of just chanting Om Mani Padme Hum. And actually, chanting Om Mani Padme Hum touches a dimension with a purity within ourselves. There's so much value in doing that. There's a special quality about all the sounds that we have from the Sanskrit alphabet. And so all the mantras that we chant, in the Sanskrit alphabet, whatever they might be, they all actually touch a deep place within ourselves. So a lot of value in chanting the mantra Avalokiteshvara, Om Mani Padme Hum. Oh, thank you. Thank you for your patience. Yeah. So. But apart from that, the landscape behind you is Sedona, Arizona, one of the sort of really beautiful places in the States. But yeah, this is a particularly beautiful tanka. It belongs to one of my friends, Nikki Keefe, but very beautifully painted. All right. Well, if there's no questions, then we'll just take a little break, and then I'll say a few things about the practice of meditation, and then we'll do some meditation. So that's the program. Thank you. I'll just conclude with a short dedication here. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you. Just take a few minutes more. So I'll just say a little bit about Buddhist meditation, but very much from the practical point of view. So before we talked a little bit about the context of meditation in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Now I'll say a little bit more about the application. And so the standard notion of meditation is that we sit down and we sit and don't move. And that's a valid point. It is very helpful to sit and not move from many points of view. Actually, if we're sitting and not moving, at least we're not harming anybody. So that's already a good thing. We're sort of somewhat, you could say, damage control. So there's already one good thing. But the other thing is that, and this is of course what's innate to the vision of Buddhism, is that our natural sanity, our natural goodness actually begins to emerge within that space. And that's where there's, you could say, the Buddha's vision was that this quality is there. We just need to see it. But as long as we're agitated, as long as we're busy, and as long as we operate under the premises of the confused projections that we generally live by in terms of, you could say, fear and aggression and yeah, all the various aspects of insecurity that I was just talking about before. And essentially what the Buddhist teaching very much refer to as the poisons of the mind or the toxins of the mind. Not that they're intrinsically real, not that we intrinsically are poisoned as such, but there's styles of confusion that operate from the point of view, and this is where meditation really is a remedy, from the point of view of this insecure place of ego or self. And in the Buddhist teaching, we talk about, it's interesting actually, the Tibetans, their word for, because when we say ego, we usually often talks, it really sort of, there's a sense of it being very solid. I think in Freudian language, they talk about the id, and just that there's sort of a self that is, you know, a basic, confused, self-centered place within ourselves. And yeah, that's not hard to see. That's obvious. But the thing is that this actually is something that's generated on the basis of a cycle of confusion that we can break. But the thing is, this self-centering, it operates with me and the other. And that's why there's always trying to grasp things that we want, and you could say keep away things that we don't like. And also in our relationship to others, we're very much about protecting ourselves in regards to others and wanting things from others or circumstances. And there's a perpetuation of this mind that we then refer to as the afflicted mind. And the practice of meditation is very much about allowing for a space in which we could calm down and be less held by that. And so that's where there's a clarity that emerges. So the fact that we sit down is not just about us sitting down and coming into a special heightened space. I remember initially when meditation was sort of began to trend in the late 60s with transcendental meditation, the slogan was very much the idea was, we're not using all our capacity. You know, we're not using our brain 100%. We're not using our psychological capacity. And if we meditate, we could become much more powerful and so forth. But the implication in Buddhist meditation is not so much that of course, yes, that does happen for sure. But at the same time, the implication really is that the practice of meditation is very much where we provide a space in which we could actually calm down and begin to actually extract ourselves from the narratives and the thinking that ordinarily generates the idea of self and other. If we look at the thoughts that we have, and actually within psychological research, there's sort of a general notion that our narratives are incredibly repetitive. We sort of go over the narratives. They're surprisingly unimaginative, not that creative. But the thing is, within these narratives, they so often center around me and my problems, my situations, my relationship to the other, and so forth. And that's where there's, within the thoughts, well, actually, there's not necessarily, you could say, much reality to it, because it's generated within situations in which this might not be happening. But we generate these narratives that very much consolidate the rigidity around self. What we're doing with meditation is actually softening the mind, softening the fear, softening this whole dualistic scenario and this sort of the dualistic storyline about me, and the drama around me, and the drama around me and other. And the good news is we're not basically like that. So in fact, we could actually be quite honest and say, I have a lot of thoughts around me. And that would be just like saying, well, I have, I have a wart on my foot, or I have, I have a sore back. If I say I have a sore back, I don't necessarily get thoroughly embarrassed about being a person with a sore back. It's just like, well, I'm gonna get a massage, or I'm gonna do some yoga. I have a sore back, and it's curable. And from the Buddhist point of view, I have ego. It's not like, oh my God, I have an ego, or I'm very ashamed of it. It's just like, you can say, I'm having a fit of ego. You can say, I'm having a fit of samsara, but I'm doing something about it. I'm going to give it the massage of meditation, or massage of Dharma. I'm onto it. So in that way, we're not basically flawed or something's wrong with us, but there's just, we've gotten ourselves into a bit of a tizzy, and something needs to be done. And it's not as if this doing is incredibly mystical, really, because it draws on already existing purity that we possess. And all we're doing with the practice of meditation is grounding ourselves within a place of actually becoming properly present. But connecting through meditation is not connecting with some higher reality. It's more just, interestingly, like we sort of say in colloquial usage, we say getting out of our heads, or getting over ourselves. Not in a moralistic way, but more just, you say, coming out. We know very often if we're in a bad mood or depressed and so on, we sort of like to sort of close in and stay in there. And then eventually we might have some brutal friend that comes and says, no, mate, you need to come out. And that's where when we actually come out, there's sunshine. There's actually, you can say there's the sky, there's the water, and we actually come out. We realized that we were unnecessarily perpetuating this sort of small space and holding on to it. So in fact, what we do with meditation is actually coming out of this circle. When we practice meditation, in sort of popular parlance, it's very often the idea that when you meditate, you don't have any thoughts. And that's not going to happen. We're very disappointing if we sit down, we're going to start meditating expecting that you don't have thoughts. Then it won't be long until we want our money back. Hey, I was promised no thoughts. And I realize when I sit down, I'm more aware of the thoughts than I've ever been. So I'd rather watch TV, something like that. I'd rather just be doped by watching Netflix. I don't want to constantly have to have all these thoughts. So the thing about meditation is, we discover how many thoughts we have, but we also, and that's what's implicit in the practice of meditation, we can be proactive in not tagging along with thoughts. So there's no notion of all of a sudden we're going to have a particular experience of no thoughts or any particular experience. But what we are doing is enabling ourselves to no longer sit with the mind that wants a particular thing or perpetuates, essentially in a state of unawareness, always sort of waiting for something to happen. The practice of meditation is where we actually connect with being fully, properly present. Probably everybody's heard about Thich Nhat Hanh, who would really promote just walking slowly. And I remember seeing sort of a video from Thich Nhat Hanh with some of his followers in a big sort of Buddhist conference, They all were just sort of walking really slowly. And we can laugh at him, but the thing is, it actually works. That's the thing, And, the Thich Nhat Hanh's whole thing about coming back and doing so with kindness, so valuable. So the goodness of this message is we can actually begin to relate wholeheartedly, unapologetically to our reality where we are. It's not like we're supposed to be in a particular place. We're supposed to be that spiritual or that egoless or that calm or whatever. It's actually about relating to what is rather than what should be. But that's not easy. And that's where the thing is, as much as we can have fridge magnets that have all sorts of brilliant advice about how we should relate to being here now and, you know, all of that, it actually requires that we provide a framework where we could actually experience that. And that's the implication of meditation. That's the discipline of meditation, is actually that we're willing to go cold turkey in terms of no entertainment, no dope, no Netflix, no phone, no iPad, no computer, no whatever, you know, that we could actually fully embrace the dignity of our existence from being properly present. And that's where when we meditate, we actually sit in a very dignified posture. If we sit like that, we're tagging along with some very venerable company down through the ages of persons who have actually sat like that. Actually, even before the Buddha and Harappan culture, there was the practice of meditation. They found figurines that date from 2000 BC of people just sitting and meditating. So it's not as if it was unknown at the time of the Buddha, but it is something that down through history, individuals have done. They have sat down and not just sat and pondered, you know, like Descartes, he would sit in a barrel and sort of essentially say, well, I think, therefore I am, that sort of thing, which with all respects to René Descartes and so forth is very valuable in terms of identifying our situation. What we actually say in the Buddhist teaching is, I'm here, I'm present. And yes, I think, therefore I'm constantly changing because I'm having different thoughts all the time. So that's where we definitely can identify cognition, but the sort of an ongoing continual, that's questionable. But yes, we do have perception, we do have experience. But the thing about what we normally do is we tag along with all our various perceptions without any particular awareness. And what we do with meditation is we train ourselves in coming back to being aware. Now, aware is the opposite of obviously being unaware or not present. And the practice of meditation is very much where we discover there's a fine line between being present and being absent. And probably most of us have sometimes marveled at how we can actually drive a car through a town without actually necessarily being here while we're having imaginary conversations and thinking about all sorts of things. And still, I mean, we're a danger to the public, actually. We're not actually there, you know? And that's where we probably know that there's a big difference between being aware, being present, and not being there. We particularly have it in conversations. If we're having a conversation with a friend who all of a sudden we see sort of the attention drifting, then we kind of get slightly annoyed. You know, we're just about to sort of divulge a really important sort of secret or share something that's meaningful for us. And our friend is just sort of sitting there watching the cars go by or something. You know, that's rather annoying. So we can see there's a place where our friend is really there with us and a place where drifting. Now, the thing is, when we sit in busy places, it's rather difficult to stop all movement around us. And what we do is we focus and we stay present with whoever we're talking with. And we can actually sustain presence without being distracted. And that's where we're sustaining awareness. And that's what we're doing in meditation. We're not going to stop the street. We're not going to stop everybody from talking in the cafe. We're not going to, you know, do anything other than just remain focused. And that's where everything that's happening in terms of our psychology, our emotions, our thoughts, and so on, well, that's all right. We're not going to stop them. But what we are going to do, and what is extraordinary, is we're not going to be absorbed and carried away by them, just like somebody who just gets carried away by whatever is happening around. We're going to stay focused and be aware of whatever is happening. So it's not a question of regarding what's happening in our mind as problematic, but it's more that we're not going to be absorbed by it. And that's where the content of our mind need not necessarily be problematic. It's also not a question of us being doped or suppressing or forgetting about what's happening in our mind, but just being aware without necessarily being entangled. Now that sounds nice, but it's not that easy. And that's where meditation in no way is sort of, well, very often it's sort of like promoted as being something that's going to give us great bliss, and you sort of see these advertisements from Club Med and somebody looking there is incredibly sort of like blissful and all of that. And then we sit down, we meditate, and we're like anything but blissful. And we're like, why are they so damn blissful and I'm not? Sort of thing. You know, there's very much a discovery that the mind doesn't really change. When we sit down, it's not as if we're reinventing ourselves or all of that, but we're more just beginning to connect with who we are. And that's a very good place to be, because not being happy with who we are and wanting to be something else, that's a very problematic place to be. But the thing is, it actually takes us being proactive in that process. And that's where meditation is very helpful, because it brings us back to properly grounding ourselves. And that's where we could begin to be more at ease with regards to ourselves, with regards to where we are. And that's also where, in that we're not so entangled in our judgment, our thinking, our interpretations, our storylines, our general sort of distraction. That's where we become more participatory. We actually become more present in the world. And that's where, interestingly, despite what meditation looks like, it's not really about withdrawing from reality. It's more about actually beginning to be present in reality. And that's a good thing, but it does require that we actually train ourselves in being properly present. And that's also where we discover that we needn't tag along with the ordinary narratives, the ordinary reactive patterns, and so forth. So there's so many good aspects that come with the practice of meditation. And of course, I don't really want to sort of make big promises about meditation, but it is really that place in which we could say the mind discovers its natural sanity, there's natural healing, there's natural freedom, you could say there's no end to the goodness of this. This really is the method that has been followed by sages. And that's where there's a big difference between philosophers, who very often were very profoundly unhappy people, and like Rodin's, the thinker, the whole idea of the deep person is very much tied up with very deeply anguished individualities and subjectivities. So there's not really like, that's the purpose of meditation. No, it's not to think deep thoughts or anything. It's more just to actually become fully present and actually begin to connect with our reality. And we can do that without necessarily having an opinion or necessarily have thoughts about it. It's more just be present and open. It's very helpful in so many different ways. Now, the way that we do this in the Buddhist tradition is very often with some practice that integrates our our ways of thinking and the ways that we ordinarily operate with the mind. So, for example, what you often do in Buddhist teachings is, and this is across all the traditions, you might recite some teaching. You might recite a particular scripture, you might recite something that you regard as particularly sacred. And in this context here, what we do is we recite a short liturgy, which is something that's practiced all across the various Buddhist traditions. It's called Buddha Anusmriti, and it just means recollecting the Buddha. And of course, we could sit and contemplate the Prime Minister, or we could contemplate all the alternatives to the Prime Minister, and we could sort of think of everyone in Parliament House, or everybody in the White House, or all of that. And these people, the moment that we think about them, they actually become present in our mind. So it actually impacts on our mind. Then we could choose to think about Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa, or we could think about the Dalai Lama. And that has a different impact. So we see who we keep in mind and what we keep in mind actually does have an impact on us. And so what we do here in this context is we contemplate the Buddha. And there's nothing wrong in that, but very often the language that we use in you could say, in this context is very often devotional. And so for the modern person who's sort of brought up with the notion of egalitarianism, democracy, and so on, sort of the idea that there's somebody that we would sort of surrender to, be devoted to, and so on, might run contrary. But the thing is, the entire legacy down from the Buddha is very much that we possess enlightened potential. And while this potential is hidden within us, it's manifest in the Buddha, in the Dalai Lama, in other persons. So that's why there's a profound respect. But that respect doesn't mean that we're establishing some absolute hierarchy. We more see the Dalai Lama as representing our own potential. We see the Buddha as being a reflection of enlightenment. And as such, the practice of devotion is very much opening up to something that we possess ourselves. You could say proportionate to the degree to which we have respect for others, we actually kindle these qualities within ourselves. So that's where the practice that you have, not just in Buddhism, but also in other traditions of respect or bhakti or devotion or whatever we call it, actually is not really about objectifying or becoming sycophantic followers of a particular individual, but rather just acknowledging that such potential exists in the universe, and invoking this, it really creates a particular atmosphere. So the liturgy we chant for the first 5 or 7 minutes or something like that, and then at the end, then we dissolve the external reference point, and then we practice simply just sitting practice. And there's 3 aspects to sitting practice, as I presented here, sort of in my tradition, so to speak. The first is the posture. And that creates you could say, a framework of physical calm. So even just sitting is very helpful for what we call samadhi, or stability of mind. It's very helpful. And particularly for the modern person, because we're so sort of being entertained constantly, we become very fidgety, and we're very often, we have a hard time sitting still. So sitting still is not really like, being held down with a straitjacket, but it's more just that we connect with our physicality. So that's where sitting is a good thing. It's doing ourselves a favor, actually, feeling our physicality. So that's sort of, you could say, the grounding in terms of just the external body. But then in terms of the mind, and that's where we have what we call mindfulness. And that's where we have an object of mindfulness, which in this case is focusing on the breath. And we particularly, actually, in my tradition, focus on the out breath. And that's because we want to connect with the world beyond just retreating into self. Because it doesn't mean that we're not allowed to think about the in-breath, but it's just focusing particularly on the out-breath is very helpful in terms of just, you say, connecting with a larger space. So that's the object of meditation. And when we're sitting, we're then placing our attention on the out-breath. It's really just being aware of the breath that exits from our nostrils and putting our attention in that, and then it dissolving with space. Then relaxing. In-breath happens naturally. Again, awareness of the out-breath as it mingles with space. Some of you have heard this once or twice before, I think. But anyway, that's really as simple as it sounds. This is radical because that's where we ordinarily tag along with whatever is coming up in our mind. And here we shift that. The mind has that sort of desire to have an object. So we're always looking for something to have as a reference point. And you could say ultimately, yes, we could go beyond duality altogether, but for the time being, our mind, we have to humbly acknowledge the mind just rather seek out objects. And that's why it's very helpful to just come back to the awareness of the breath and have that as the object. So that's the second aspect of the technique. The third aspect is whatever thoughts arise, they're allowed to be there. Us being present doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're not going to have any thoughts, but they really come and they're there, but we're also here. So the thoughts, yes, memories come up, ideas come up, plans come up, and whatever, yes, it comes up, but it's taking place within an open space where we are. If we connect with just being present through awareness of the breath, we're already anchored in a very big and open space. And thoughts come, we needn't suppress them, we needn't be absorbed by them, but by simply sustaining awareness. And that's where having the reference point of the breath, remaining fully present without getting absorbed, just like the person in the cafe, not getting absorbed by the cars or people passing, but just staying properly present, connecting with the breath, and being basically aware. Then whatever thoughts arise, that's absolutely fine. They're not really seen as a problem, and we don't evaluate them, even though we might have brilliant ideas, or we might have painful memories, or we might have all sorts of schemes or fantasies or whatever. We just come back to the breath, and that's where there's not really a sort of a particular evaluation taking place. The moment that we begin to evaluate, that's in reference to me. So that's where we begin to essentially perpetuate the same old, same old. So there's this sort of courageous embracing of whatever comes up, so welcome. That's just referred to as thinking, just thoughts. Thoughts are bound to come. Sure, they're welcome to be there. So that's where, whether it's emotions or memories or thoughts or whatever, we simply just regard whatever arises as thoughts, and we just come back to the breath. So in this way, there's the three aspects of the meditation, which are then sitting, the posture, coming back to the breath as the object of mindfulness, and finally, whatever thoughts arise, simply viewing them as clouds in space, simply just allowing them to be there, but not being absorbed by them. So these three aspects is what we practice while we're sitting. Now, the way we do it here normally is we sit 15 minutes, then we have 5 minutes of mindful walking, and then again sit 15 more minutes. And then at the end, there's a short aspiration, which is really just and then we'll chant the liturgy. Then there's a place where we chant a mantra. It's the mantra of the Buddha for 100 times. I have a mala here, I think, so I'll do that. But then after that, we dissolve the visualization of the Buddha, and then we just do the practice of meditation. Okay. And take a 2-minute break just to stretch your legs. Okay. So we begin on page 3. So even though it's not really part of the liturgy, I very often just read the italics that come just on top of the page. In the Samadhi Raj Sutra, it is said, those who while walking, sitting, standing or sleeping recollect the moonlight Buddha will always be in the Buddha's presence and will attain the vast nirvana. And his pure body is the color of gold, beautiful is the protector of the world. Whoever visualizes him like this practices the meditation of the Bodhisattvas. In keeping with this, we should practice remembering our incomparable teacher, the Lord of Sages, in the following way. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering, and may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. Ah, as the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky, amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jeweled lion throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Shakyas. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks, clad in the three Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture. His right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, the body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginning this time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones, ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teaching ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future. For the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray, with total confidence and faith, do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Teyata muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Dvayata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Dvayata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Dvayata muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om 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 muni muni mahamunaya soha. Muni muni mahamunaya soha. Muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om Mani Mani Maha Munaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates great radiance, multicolored rays of wisdom light, spelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like that. And then the aspiration prayer of Maitreya. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye and the sages and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to Bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created throughout the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in the realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme primordial wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside in the 10 levels, in all direction of the worlds in the 10 directions, to awaken into perfect enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those, supreme among humans, to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dharma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no existent sentient beings, nor life forms. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of the self. May I realize the Dharmata where the self is not present. Entities such as grasping onto a self and mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethic that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's fight, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of all time, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in a bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may all my intentions be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya, who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish evermore and more. May the Buddha appear in this world, may the light of the teaching shine like the sun, may the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti avad Yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukani nignata akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukani ignata tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukani ignata tavan mama stiti bhuyahan jagadukani ignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. So thank you.